Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this most important, timely conversation with some incredible women, mothers, powerhouses, just some amazing work being done by these beautiful human beings on behalf of their children. What we have here is four incredible women spanning from Los Angeles to South Dakota, and from just small town, big town, just talking about what it means to raise a transgender child in America. As we are celebrating and bringing awareness to Transgender Awareness Week, it is at the forefront of almost every conversation that we're having at Free Mom Hugs. And so I can't think of a better way to raise awareness and bring about education than invite mothers who have skin in the game, who have been doing the damn thing. And I just couldn't be more pleased to be linked to these women. And with a short introduction, I'll start with Cristina Spencer. Christina Spencer's DNA is in Free Mom Hugs. She has been involved with the organization since the get-go. We had an opportunity to meet, and I'm just continually am so impressed with the work that she's doing. She will be the first to admit that she's a family has financial privilege that has made their journey easier, but she also is attuned to that they are a rare exception of that, and how society as a whole makes the process often painful and complicated. When I first met Christina Spencer, she shared with me how she went to the Supreme Court to hear deliberations regarding the anti-discrimination bills, and how she was appalled at the most educated members of the culture, how they misgendered and misinformed so many people and processes during that process. And she's a writer. She considers herself, like all of our panelists, as accidental activists. And she talks a lot about the decision-making process. She shares with families, she hosts gender education workshops. She's a writer, and she just works directly with parents of gender diverse children. Just incredible. In fact, if I just hadn't met her myself, I didn't think she was even real. And then, so Christina, I think you waved already. Give a wave.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you. And next we have Susan Williams. Susan, raise your hand for our guest here. Susan is a Free Mom Hugs co-leader for South Dakota, and she founded two nonprofits in the response to the lack of resources to transgender individuals and their families in her state of Sioux Falls, South Dakota. She's the founder and executive director of the Transformation Project. And then that led into starting a second nonprofit called the Transformation Project Advocacy Network. And we're going to get into that during a few of our questions here. Susan, thank you for being here and just offering your expertise. And then Monique, if you would raise your hand, is a proud mom. You have a daughter and a trans non-binary. You have, what I love what you shared with your bio, it says, in a desire to be a better parent, in a way, to be a better parent that her trans adult needed, you knew that you needed not only to continually educate yourself on the matters of transgender and now non-binary, but you also needed to seek support for yourself. So you joined PFLAG, you got plugged in, and guess what? Now you're facilitating online meetings there and just really making a difference where you are, Monique. Thank you so much. And then Sherry, I've got your bio on my phone. Let me pull that up. Sherry, if you would wave to those who are joining us. You've been married for almost 50 years. Congratulations. You were a retired psychologist, and you spent a lot of time consulting nonprofit boards. We might have to talk later. You have a transgender son, and you work with Free Mom Hugs on the card letter campaign for seniors, which I love that. And you were raised in Ohio, but you live in Los Angeles, and you still consider yourself very much to be a Midwesterner, and we're going to talk about that. You do have degrees from Vassar College, the University of Michigan, and your work history is primarily as a therapist for families involved in physical, sexual, and psychological abuse. Thank you so much, Sherry, for just lending your talents here. And I want to go over just some brief descriptions, and then we'll get into the meat of this conversation. A couple of terms we're going to use today, and I'm just going to use the very simplest of definitions because it just keeps it simple to understand. You will hear us talk about sex assigned at birth. The simple term definition for that is when a baby is born, a doctor or a midwife looks at the baby's body anatomy and declares whether they're a boy or girl or intersex. Intersex means you're born with both attributes of male, female. And then the term transgender. This means that when your gender identity, how you feel, is different than what the doctor assigned you at birth. And we're going to get into that a little bit more during the conversation. And the term non-binary. Non-binary is people who don't feel like the words boy or girl fits. They may feel like both or neither one, and that's okay. They sometimes use the pronouns they, them, and theirs. And then the last definition I like to talk about is affirming and non-affirming. Affirming means that you celebrate the community. We celebrate our transgender children. Non-affirming in this particular conversation means we're not acknowledging the transgender child. And we might think that it's just, we don't celebrate it, we don't acknowledge it. And obviously the parents joining us today are fully affirming. They celebrate their transgender children and the community at large and work very hard to educate and help other parents and families and allies along. So I've got some questions here, and we'll start with Cristina Spencer. What I love about you, Christina, is that you talk about resources, community versus clinicians, and the important values that you found in both of those aspects. Can you talk about those?
Sure. Thanks again for having me today, Sarah. What I wanted, one of the things I really wanted parents of trans and non-binary kids to take from my story is that here in the Bay Area, we have access to some of the most advanced clinicians in the field. It's relatively easy here compared to other places in the country to raise a transgender child. We have a lot of advantages. And still, the most accurate, up-to-date information for me has always come from the community of parents and the trans community specifically. And I think, I know I was raised to, trust my doctor and believe in authorities, and I do trust my doctor, and ultimately the Supreme Court went the right way for us, even though their fundamental understanding of the issues on the day of the case wasn't as clear as I would have wanted. But I think it's really important for parents of trans kids to understand is that we are in a field that's in flux, and each child is unique, and our child is the expert in their experience, and we are the expert advocates for our children. Nobody knows our children better than we do. And, in a field that's in flux, it's important to value our own wisdom equally as some of this more authoritative wisdom that we have access to. And again, it's not to say that I don't trust doctors. I do. It's just that from my perspective, in the Bay Area, where we have a lot of really great advanced care, I was still sometimes coming to the doctor and having more current information than the doctor did. And that always came from other parents of transgender children.
Yes, I agree. Moms learn from other moms. And when you have another mom going through what you have, either they've been through the journey a lot longer than you, or maybe not as long. So you share information, you learn from each other.
So in this parenting journey, the community is absolutely critical.
Mm-hmm. And something that you mentioned in a pre-interview is that, what worked 2 years ago with science and work being done may not be applicable today, or it's so much more advanced. A lot of advancements take some time, and some happen very rapidly. And what worked 2 years ago may not work now.
Nobody cares about trans and non-binary kids more than their affirming moms. Affirming moms are some of the best advocates on the planet for this community of kids.
Yes, yes, I love that. Thank you, Christina. Now, Sherry, am I pronouncing your name right? Forgive me, Sherry or Sherry?
Sherry.
Thank you,
It's
Sherry.
Sherry.
The question that I have for you is that we talked in a pre-interview about the two dynamics, being African-American and then a family of faith. And when I say faith, what has been your experience? Because you have a different dynamic, again, being African-American and then the faith aspect. Could you talk about that?
Sure. Our family, we're a Christian family. My husband and I were both born and raised into Christian families. And in fact, on both sides of our families, we have a number of ministers, primarily Baptist ministers. So I consider myself to be a very faithful Christian. My children were raised that way, went to church regularly. And I know that specifically my transgender son has had people say things to him or respond to him that their religion does not allow them to accept him. We've had that in one of the churches we belong to. We no longer belong to that church. We've had conversations with various family members. And I think it's very difficult in some African-American communities to address issues with regard to sexuality and certainly non-traditional sexuality. And when you add the element of faith, it can become very contentious. So I pretty much addressed it with the people in our family as, this is my brand of Christianity. This is what we believe. And these are the reasons why we believe this fits into Christianity. Basically that, I believe in love, I believe in sharing love, and I believe in acceptance of people. And I don't believe in the love the sinner, not the sin, because I don't see a sin. So those are some of the kinds of discussions that I've had to have. And the bottom line is, if you really can't accept my child, nice knowing you, still love you, but we'll love you from a distance.
I mean, I thank you for speaking to boundaries, and for letting people know where you stand and how that process is. I love to, and I share some things that really caught my interest in a pre-interview, if you would, that your son, may I ask, is your son in Los Angeles?
Yes.
Okay. When they had come out to work, that the company said, great, what can we do? What do you need? Tell us what we can do to make your work life better. And I loved that, how a generation, like you spoke of your family and how they might have some difficulty accepting this dynamic in your family and the difference that your son experienced in their workplace. And so
I think it's great. And I think that's one of the aspects, like being in the Bay Area, being in Los Angeles, you do have a somewhat more open-minded community. And I think part of it, but for me, kind of a concern is that I don't know that he really is aware that that's not normal. The response on a job of, do we need to have a mixed gender bathroom? I mean, that I don't think most people experience, but he was very happy that it went that way.
Yeah, I was very happy to hear that. And, recently sharing a panel discuss or a presentation, Free Mom Hugs presentation in a workplace that was known to be very conservative. We shared the Free Mom Hugs presentation. And then 2 hours after that presentation, we heard from a gentleman who said he'd been with the company 3 years and he came out. And that's the only place he's out, is in his workplace. So what a difference, being visibly affirming, what a difference that can make in a life. Now, let's talk about faith, because some of the biggest obstacles that we face with families with LGBTQ plus children is the faith aspect. How do you reconcile something that we absorb to be wrong? How do you reconcile that to come to a point to celebrate your children? Like I was asked recently by a pastor, he goes, I accept gay people, but I don't know if I can celebrate them. So this is a question for the entire panel. What was that aha moment? What was it that made that shift, either whether your faith or just everything that you knew, maybe something that helped you understand your child better, that pivotal moment? Can you speak to that just a minute? Raise your hand if you want to go first. Monique, thank you.
Hi, I'll speak to this. One of the things, a pivotal moment for me, my son came out as first identified as queer, and then trans. So he was assigned female at birth, and then identified as trans male, and then now identifies more as non-binary. So I've had to really educate myself. But when he first came out, when they first came out as trans male, I assumed, that you'd express, the gender expression that you'd express 100% now in what we would call a masculine or more male expression. And once they came out as trans male, they started to wear more what we would consider dresses and type feminine things than I could ever get them to as a kid. So I'm thinking, what, as a parent, you're like, are you confused? Is this, what's going on here? And in PFLAG, I raised this when I went to one of the meetings. This was way before I was a facilitator. And I just asked the parents, what's going on? And what I learned was that when a person comes out, it doesn't mean that now that's our thinking that you're going to now all of a sudden go to the opposite gender. And there are some trans who may express solely in what we would consider a masculine or expression, and some who may, be 100% expressing more in a feminine, what we would call a feminine expression. But then there are those who express either way. And my son describes it as he flows through gender expression like water through a sieve. And I love that. So I learned that it doesn't mean that they've changed their mind. It doesn't mean that they're not sure. It's just that once they've come out and reconcile that within themselves, now they have this freedom to just really express how they choose to express. They have that freedom. And as parents, when I saw that, it was like, okay, I get it. I get it now. But that was a huge moment for me, just to really accept that once you're actually free to express who you are, that expression may be on any given day. I mean, we choose how we choose to dress on any given day. Some days we want to, put on lipstick and whatever. And some days you just, I'm throwing on a hat and that's all I got,
That's it.
And we give ourselves that freedom, but we have to allow our trans children, our trans adults, that same freedom. And what I learned there was that it's a journey. As I said, my son started out queer, trans male, now identifies more as trans non-binary. So to the parents that are going through it, I would just encourage them that it's a journey. Learn along with them. It doesn't mean that they're not sure. It's that they're finding their voice. They're finding their language, their expression, because for so long they've had to hold all of that in. And now that they're getting their bearing, now you will start to see that full expression flourish.
If I can add something to that, I had an aha moment that was genuinely aha. I thought I got it. I thought I was very accepting and I was on board with this transition. And Corey, my son, had chest surgery, had upper surgery. And when he came out, he was still very groggy, still under the anesthesia. And when the nurse came out, I thought, well, he wants his girlfriend. And the nurse said, no, he wants his mommy. So I went back to see him and he's, floating, eyes are still closed. And then this beatific smile comes on his face and he says, Mommy, I got my chest. And when that hit me, that for all of these years, Corey was 28 when he started transitioning. So for all of these years, that chest that I thought was so beautiful was a burden for him. And when I could understand on a very visceral level, removing those breasts was so important to being who he is in the world. And that was my aha moment, that this is real. This is not a fasting phase. This is not a thought process. This is visceral. This is identity.
That is a beautiful moment. Christina, you go.
Yeah, I would love to follow up Sherry's aha moment with mine. I think where my hurdle was really trying to relearn the idea that gender wasn't just a social concept, that it wasn't just a series of conventions of how people dressed and behaved, that like Sherry's talking about, that there's something very visceral, very deep going on in the experience. And I was at a writing conference actually, and there was a group of trans writers who was presenting on their experience. And the assignment for this panel was that each of them was to write a short essay about their experience of gender dysphoria. And, or maybe it was just trans life generally, but a lot of people wrote about gender dysphoria. And they arrived at the panel, and then they took this essay and they cut it into little strips, little, couple sentence long pieces of paper. And then they put them in a box and they mixed them all up. And then the panel was simply one trans writer after another reading directly from the box. So imagine a mishmash of conversations all put together. And what was so clear, what was being said by these talented writers over and over and over again, had to do with the incongruence between something deep, deep, deep in who they were and their outer experience. And to hear it from so many different voices in so many subtly different ways, but saying the same thing, this kind of multifaceted description of a common experience, really helped me get it. That this isn't just wanting to wear clothes. Like, I knew it was deep, but I didn't. It's one of those things when you have gender congruence, it's very difficult to imagine not having gender congruence, to having incongruence. And these writers were so talented at describing that visceral sensory experience, and to hear it from multiple different points of view at the same time was very powerful and made me really get it.
I love that. I learned from hearing stories too, like that. And Susan, if you could touch on maybe that pivotal moment when you knew that you had to go forward. There was no turning back, where you had to make a decision for your child to move forward in who they were showing you who they are. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Definitely. Well, when that happened for me is when our 10-year-old wrote an 8-page letter asking us to use different pronouns and a new name. And I had to run to the bathroom and was physically sick after reading about all of the trauma that my child had endured, just having to live in this body that we all thought was a girl. And just thinking about all the implications that would come from having a transgender child, it was heartbreaking knowing that at that time there was legislation happening in our state where it was the bathroom bill back in 2016. People online were being vile and hateful, violent. And so I just wondered, how are we going to navigate this? And are we going to need to leave our state? But that time, after dealing with gender dysphoria for, so long, but having it only be apparent to me for the prior year, and trying to figure that out and read and research and going back and forth. But just having that letter and seeing, reading the pain that they went through on a daily basis really completely shifted me to, we need to help our child and we need to do it now.
At 8 years old, to be able to write or even verbalize what that experience is like is profound. May I ask, did you save the letter?
I sure did. And he was 10 at the time, but it was an 8-page letter. Saved it and
Same.
goodness. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful letter. It was heart-wrenching to read, but the beauty of him being able to verbalize what all had been going on in his head his whole life. It was a gift to us, for sure.
Well, I commend you for allowing even just the vocabulary. That's one thing that I didn't afford my own son, to be able to express themselves at such a young age, because we just didn't talk about, things that pertain to those type of feelings. And when our children are sharing with us the most tender, intimate parts of who they are, whether they're children or adults, to be able to take that beautiful dynamic and not react, in a way that might shame them, or, you had the good fortune just to kind of remove yourself from it, so you didn't put that on your child. So I'm so glad. And that you're where you are now. You shared with me in the pre-interview how when you started making this transition as affirming and helping your child to move forward, that your family had been saving for a while money to recarpet your house. But you live in South Dakota, Sioux Falls, a very small town. You said that you had more cows than people, and that you took that money that you'd been saving for your carpet to a security system in your home. And I thought, wow. And that South Dakota is the a testing ground for anti-transgender bills. And the bathroom bill, I did not know this, originated out of South Dakota. So my goodness, you have fear and anxiety, not only for the well-being of your child. And now, how in the world did you get from that to not only one, but two nonprofits now that serve the transgender community in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, not only for their health and well-being, but for political aspects too. You're an advocate, as well as, I have two dynamics here listed, but you speak to bills that affect the transgender community as far as, and for educating. Let's talk about, when did you realize you've got to do something in your town or you're going to move?
Right. So just for total honesty here, 5 years ago, I didn't even know what gender dysphoria was.
Mm-hmm.
If you would have, talked to me about, can you describe transgender? I wouldn't have really had anything. I had never knowingly met a transgender person. Even though I had one living in my house, I just didn't know it. But yeah, we had this money saved. I was completely freaked out by, reading things online and hearing other moms' horror stories of how they were treated in their towns. So, decided to go for that security system, and always in the back of my mind was thinking about, where are we going to move if this doesn't work out well? What if something happens at school? What if, our neighbors? I was just very, very concerned. Two nonprofits, gosh, that's nothing I would have set out to do. The people that helped me get through this time, with me crying every day and pleading with God to reveal something to me and help our family through this. I think they probably thought I was a lost cause. So how this all started is basically, there were no resources here. There were no support groups. The closest one was a few hours away in a different state. And our state is very long. It's 6 hours across. And so I knew that if we were having trouble, then the rest of the state was having trouble too. And I knew that there had to be other trans kids here, even though I didn't know of any. So we started just a really informal little support group. Started off with a picnic where only our therapist showed up, nobody else. But my goodness, it's come a long way, because once a parent of a trans kid finds another parent of a trans kid, a huge connection grows, and we support each other. We love on each other. We answer each other's questions. And pretty soon it grew to 50 different people in my basement trying to figure out this journey together. So that was a couple years ago. And we've got our first nonprofit is more the support, educate, empower. And then the second one is advocating for the dignity and well-being of transgender South Dakotans.
Excellent. I mean, just the transformation, and I'm sure we've all done it, where you had to just make a decision, whether it's just in your own household, within your own family or extended family, to just make a stand. And I wonder, it makes me wonder, your child, do you find that they, how do I say, that they have to come out? Like school, how did you handle school? Like the first year of school or college, like how did you put those safeguards up? Or even equip your child to do that for themselves as they get older? How did you handle school, the first sleepover, the first gym class? I don't know, just those first interaction publicly, where you're not going to be with your child during the school day, or I don't know. Does that make sense? Monique, you want to go first? Like school?
Yeah, so my situation was a little different. I'm probably more like Sherry because my son came out in college.
Oh, that's right.
But actually it was the college professor, that one of his college professors, that really helped him, because my son never liked the name that I gave him at birth. Even as a kid, didn't like it. And I didn't realize that at college, of course, he hadn't come out then, but before he even came out, he just said something like, I can't use that name anymore. And the professor said, let's just go with your initials then. And that's what he started with.
Oh.
So it was, for him, college was it was an affirming place, I think. And he was in New York City, so that helped, being in New York, and so there were more resources than our town that we were in upstate New York.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was just for them, college became that place, what we really think of college to be, where you get to be a critical thinker and you get to explore and understand. So I know so many parents in our support groups and PFLAG do struggle with that, with the whole going through primary school, elementary school, but our experience was different. But I will say, in some ways, I did avoid some of the, what parents, maybe Susan and some of the others went through, but there was a lot of anxiety and depression and things that come out of not expressing and not coming out when you're younger and not being true to yourself younger. And Sherry may have had that same experience with her son. So while I didn't have that experience with coming through elementary school, there's still a coming out, whether it's to your friends, to if you have church, so there is that experience, but I didn't have it directly in the public school arena.
Corey was actually in the military when he came out, and when he transitioned, he was gay already, he was a lesbian. And there was a kind of underground group, Facebook group for people with different non-traditional sexuality of any kind, that were all people in the military. And he made the decision to tell his commanding officer and to, completely change his gender while in the military. I was terrified. I was so afraid for him. And again, they were so accepting. And this was during the last administration, just about the time that we were told they did not want transgender people in the military. Corey was actually given a coin for being willing to take all the directives that came down the line and synthesizing them and then reporting that out to his company. And he took that on as his own personal responsibility.
Sherry, one thing that you made me think about and this came out later again, as when my son was in high school, was in theater at that time, and had a core group of friends. And of the 6 of them to date, only one of them is cisgender, or what we call straight. They never spoke about it in school. They never did, never even had any conversations about it. But yet there was an affinity there. There was a knowing there without speaking, because perhaps they didn't have the word. Two of them were ministers. I think one or two were children of ministers or pastors. So they never, and I asked my son, I said, did you guys ever speak? No, never did. But there was a closeness there, and there was something, there was a knowing, a kindred spirit, I think, there, recognizing it, even though none of them felt safe enough, unfortunately, to have those conversations that they then reformed as adults when they reconnected.
I'm happy to talk a little bit about school too. How it was great to hear about the affirming college, and I mean, Sherry, your strength to just kind of ride out your son transitioning in the military, I would have been really afraid too. I think, you know, one of the pieces that's coming out in this conversation is really context makes such a difference. And what I'll say is, you know, again, Bay Area is generally more accepting, but we definitely had problems in school. We definitely had issues in school. My child was gender nonconforming from the very beginning. He was assigned female at birth and is now a transmasculine guy. But we had to change schools because the families that had known him from kindergarten, even though we live here in the Bay Area, and even though they said they were supportive, they still sort of couldn't, overnight, sort of didn't want to have sleepovers anymore. And, you know, had really what felt like aggressive questions to me about our choices medically for our child. And that we were in an independent school, a private school, where I actually thought it was going to be really great, but especially because the laws in California require schools to support trans kids. But that first head of school, while she supported us verbally, she didn't do the things that need to be done, you know, to support us actually. And it allowed a lot of conflict to brew in the parent community. So without that sort of overt leadership, it was dicey. So we had to change schools. All three kids, we moved towns actually, because I just got so tired of answering questions about my child who was no longer using that name. It just was too much. We didn't move far, but we moved far enough that our whole family got a fresh start. And my kids, all three of them now go to a small progressive Catholic school. I'm very interested to see what's going to happen. We're holding a workshop about this exact kind of topic, gender identity and things like that, actually this Friday. And one of the things that I want parents out there to know is that I was happy to do it. This is what I do professionally. I work with parents one-on-one and I give workshops to groups. But I sat down with the head of school and I said, I need you to go out before me. I need you to lay the groundwork in this community of how you make sense of being affirming and being Catholic. I just want it spelled out to the whole community before we open up this conversation, because I know, I can guarantee you, there are at least a handful of families, even here in the Bay Area, who are not on board. And I need them to know that's fine, keep it at home, but at school, this is how it's going to go. So I'm very curious to see how this goes. I'm a little nervous, honestly, because we've been through this so many times, and because people who don't have a trans or non-binary child in the Bay Area assume that the Bay Area is very supportive. And it is mostly, but when the rubber meets the road, there's still always a few families who are not on board, and they can make it very, very unpleasant.
Yes, thank you, Christina. I love that you made sure that the people in authority or in leadership roles, they to be on board and to be able to voice that, it really does have a ripple effect on how everything else is received. A lot
Absolutely.
of people, they don't know how they feel until they start having a conversation about it, you know.
Yes.
And you say, you know, most people in the Bay Area are affirming, but those pockets that are not can make life miserable.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I do think it is important to rely on school administrators and leaders to really lay the groundwork. And the one other piece that I would say is in any school environment, it's really important for the people in leadership to understand what their parameters are around free speech, because you can't really have an inclusive school if you are not also creating the context where inclusion is actually possible. And that includes around speech. So there's a wonderful book called Safe Spaces, Brave Spaces by John Palfrey that's wonderful for school administrators to understand the role that free speech plays and sort of curated speech plays in an educational environment.
Mm-hmm. Any resources that are mentioned here, we'll have them listed. And I love that you mentioned about it has to go beyond just a conversation in the office. We as parents, you have every right to ask your school what their policies and procedures are. Do they have an anti-bullying procedure? Do they have a GSA group, a Gay Straight Alliance, any type of support group? You have every right to ask these, and it's something that I didn't question authority. I'm of the generation where we learned never to question authority, didn't talk about money or sex or talk about authority or question authority. So that explains a lot. But what a difference that can make. And if they don't have a policy, there's so many resources out there now, just like the book that you mentioned, to be able to offer that in the library. Do they have books in the library that, you know, offer information, stories about, you know, kids, so they can, you know, just see people like themselves? I love that. It's almost like you just need permission. It's like you need permission to search things out. It sounds absurd to say it, but I know I certainly did. I needed to hear from my peers, it's okay to search this matter out, right? But let's talk about fears. What if you had a fear, if you could just name one that you were able to overcome, or maybe you're still facing it today? What's the fear that you have? And is it fear that is based on the unknown? Like, what's the future for our children? Or maybe something, I don't know how to explain it. What's just your biggest fear, whether it's founded or not?
I think for me personally, the night that Corey came over and told us he was transgender, my husband and my son didn't seem to have any questions or concerns. And my immediate fear was, I'm losing my little girl. I'm losing my child. My child is gone. And I don't know who this guy is going to be. My greatest fear was this person that I just adore is somehow going to have a different personality or something. I don't even know what I thought was going to happen. But that was my biggest fear. And it was very hard to find any help with that. All the books I read said, your child isn't dead. You don't have to mourn your child. I'm like, I'm mourning my daughter. Let me mourn my daughter. And it really just took time to see that this male child who came home, a male adult actually, was still my child. Very much the same personality, very much the same attitudes, very aware of what my concerns were, even though I didn't voice them. I thought I did a great job of, being on board. And he later let me know that was not okay. It was okay to share some of my concerns, but that it made it difficult for him because he didn't know what I was worried about. He just knew that there was something there. So that was really it for me. And I think a lot of parents fear that fear of loss of your child, the personality, the person. And if anything, I think we are closer. We're closer. We were pretty close before. So yeah, that was mine.
Anybody else?
Sure, I'll go. Of course, you know, as you go through this journey, of course, because of the, you know, whether they're doing hormones or having top surgery or whatever, there's the health, of course, and then the safety in terms of the bills that's passed, the bathroom, you know, there's those fears that I think all of us as parents, you know, feel when you think about our transgender child. But once I got past those fears, the thing that I feared once I really sat with it myself was, who's going to love my child? Will my son get to enjoy the richness of a romantic relationship? You know, is there someone that's going to love him? I didn't want him to be alone in this world. And, you know, and as a parent, you know, you want that, regardless of what it looked like. I just, you know, who's going to love my child? And then when I realized that, you know, love is expansive. And my son has so many people, including family, but his, as they say, the chosen community that love him, and even romantically is in a relationship now. So that fear, again, from what we can, in our minds, we think, you know, oh, there's, who can understand this besides me and your mom? Is there someone, you know? And yes, that was a fear that I had to overcome. And I saw just as I started to meet families, and it's so affirming to see adult trans people in just healthy, normal, everyday life. Because as a parent, and I can imagine, and I've heard the stories as a facilitator for people, like parents whose children came out as trans early on, they can't even fathom that adult journey because you're just in that day-to-day trying to work through those issues. But, you know, when you get past that, you can see that, yes, there is love there. They will find, if it's their desire to be in a romantic relationship, there is a person, or there are persons who will love them regardless, because of who they are inside, regardless of the expression, who they are, there is someone that will love them. So that was a fear that I had to really just sit with and allow myself to just go through the whole emotion of it, and then to see it on the other side.
Yes, that's something I hadn't thought about, but yes, we do think about that, like who will love my child and be just honor and just really respect.
Yes.
And dignity. One thing, Christina, if you would touch on, now this is like way over my head, but I don't even know what it's called, but it's a scientific term, like to continue the generation of your child, to talk about, do you know what I'm asking?
Like parenting and just future fertility of trans kids. Sure.
That's it. That's the one. Thank you.
So one of the side effects of early medical transition for young trans children is that they'll, you know, the purpose of it is to never experience their endogenous puberty, to bring their bodies into alignment with their gender identity early. It has like, it's life-saving from a mental health perspective. So it's an absolutely important process for these children to go through. And I want to be really clear that I 100% support early transition for trans kids. That said, the process isn't perfect. One of the side effects for kids who have not experienced their own endogenous puberty is that they're probably going to be infertile. We're just beginning to learn more about this. 2009 was the year that the first pediatric gender clinic opened in the United States. So these kids are just becoming childbearing age. So that was an issue that was challenging for me. And what I want to say is, again, in California, we were able to really push the limits. And my son is one of the first trans boys in the country to have preserved mature egg follicles the way you would do an IVF. Before, they used the IVF procedure to preserve some of his reproductive material. It's frozen in a special freezer in UCSF. So we were really thrilled to be able to do that again. I think Cole was probably the fourth or fifth child in the country to do this. And this is one of the ways where I really had to advocate for my child and find answers for what I thought might be there. In Australia, it's the regular procedure in young transitioning male to female children to preserve some of the testicular tissue. So I really want parents to know that this is the very cutting edge of technology for trans youth. It's not widely available, but from my perspective, because we were able to, it was important for us to try to do it, both because I thought that was important to my son and he feels really, really good about having done it, but also just to say, this is important. You know, let's not have misconceptions about adult trans lives. You know, these kids are going to want to have rich, loving families. And not that I don't want to have any bias toward biological children and against adopted children. It's not about that at all. But, you know, I think in my book, it's a human right to have choices about how you become a parent, when you become a parent. And I wanted my son to have those options.
Thank you, Christina. That really is something that you're the first person that really had that kind of conversation where it's like, I had never thought about that. You know, one of the first events that I was invited to have a Free Mom Hugs table at was to a La Leche League. And I thought, what am I going to do there? But you know, the first 5 people that approached the table, out of 5 people, 3 of them had transgender children. And it was the first term I heard about a transgender male breastfeeding. I mean, I had to wrap my head around that. But once you understand it, it's like the aha moment you were talking about. It's like, once you are aware of it, it just expands your mind and you're thinking far beyond. And for science to be able to think that far ahead of something so important, I'm just so thankful that you're having the conversation, we're starting the dialogue and raising awareness about it, because you're the first time I've ever heard that conversation. So thank you.
Well, again, one of the reasons, you know, we did, I think we were, you know, the fertility doctor who helped us asked me why she's not seeing more families with trans kids. Why? And I think partly it's that, you know, the initial experience, there's so much for parents to learn and wrap their heads around, and so much personal work parents have to do to kind of get themselves up to speed with their child. You know, when my son was sort of desperate to go on hormone blockers, that was the topic, and we were really working it hard. And it wasn't until he had been on blockers for about a year that he said to me, "Mom, I think maybe I would want to have my own baby." It's because the gender takes primacy. So that core dysphoric feeling, that discomfort with incongruence is so all-consuming for trans kids that until that's addressed, it's really hard to hear about some of the secondary topics. But because Cole was lucky enough to go on blockers early and have just that time to think and breathe, he had a year to kind of settle down and then be like, yeah, Mom, I think we should really think about this. You know, he had time, and not everyone has time. And so I just want to encourage families to, you know, take deep breaths and be in touch with family and friends. And if anyone ever wants to ask me questions about what we did, I'm totally available.
I love that. Now, if we could focus on going forward. Christina, I know you said earlier about just go forward. I have it written down here. I'm sorry. You had a really good term. I want to reuse it. Not looking back. Just don't look back at whatever you did wrong or the mistakes or what you wish you would have done differently, but how to go forward in a positive way, in a healthy way, and to find support for yourselves. Yes, absolutely. We need to support our children and just set them up to be successful and healthy and happy and all of those things we want for our children. But how do we support each other as parents? Where did you find your support system? Was it in another parent? Was it like PFLAG? There's a private online Facebook group for moms with transgender children. When you thought you were the only one in the world with a transgender child, what was the first part of support? Was it a book? Was it something online? What was it for you that just gave you a lifeline?
I'll share mine with you, Sarah. I had read a book about a mom with a transgender kid, and I cried a lot because so much of it hit home. And, this is at the time when we didn't know anyone else. And, I was wondering if we were the only family out there. And I actually contacted the author and said, I know this is so crazy, but oh my gosh, we're out here in the middle of nowhere, it feels like, and just need some guidance, just want to talk to somebody. And so that was my first time talking with somebody. After that, I got hooked up with there's a couple of Facebook groups that you had mentioned, was able to be a part of those until I eventually found someone in my state that had a trans kid.
I actually found a lot of help for people with younger children and adolescents. I couldn't find anything for parents of adults. And the issues are somewhat different. There are some concerns that I had information that was faulty because it was based on younger children. So I would make a suggestion and Corey would look at me like, no, mom, that might work if you're 12. But it's too late for me to do that. I have to do it this way. So some of it was educating myself, but I felt very much alone. And none of the things I'm very intellectual, and the things that I read did not help. And I was struggling. And a friend of mine said, do you know this person that, and she has a transgender child who's, younger than Corey, but still older. And I'm like, I don't know her. I can't just cold call somebody and ask for personal information. But my friend called her and she called me as opposed to waiting for me to call her. And it was such a delight to have somebody that I wasn't afraid to say anything to. This is what my fears are. This is, what can you say this to your child? Do you mess up and use the wrong pronoun? Do you have to get rid of all the baby pictures or, the younger pictures and all of those kinds of things that just another parent would know. And I was not on Facebook. I just got into Facebook, and thank God, because that's where I found free mom hugs. But I think another parent is always going to be the best resource. And that's one of the primary reasons I wanted to participate, is to be available to other parents and to say that you're not alone, and whatever your questions or concerns are, some one of us has had that same concern, and we are still working on it. We're works in progress.
I love that.
For me, as you said, I did find support in PFLAG. And as you said, Sherry, there weren't a lot of the parents were, had younger children. So I didn't find a lot of parents who were parents to adult children. But I also realized that people were then starting to reach out to me because my child was adult. But it helped because and a lot, I think my first meeting, I don't even know if I actually said anything, shared anything until probably maybe the third month of meetings or so. I just listened and absorbed. And then when I got ready to speak, I just, tears. I didn't even have anything to say really. But it just helped, knowing you're not alone, knowing that there's someone you could talk to, even if, I love what one of the folks that are at my spiritual center says, when you've heard one trans person's story, you've heard one trans person's story. But while we all have different stories and our children have different stories, just knowing that there was someone out there to talk to, someone that was going through something similar, just meant the world to me. Because while you may have, if you're blessed to have a family member or a friend who does want to be there, they just don't, we're still getting the tools and the language. They have no frame of reference. There's, they're doing their best to be there for you, but there's nobody like a parent who's in that arena, as Brene Brown shares the, quote often, until someone's in that arena with you, you got to find that support. And so I'm just encouraging parents, whoever listens and comes across this video, this taping, to just look for it's out there. You may feel like Susan, like you're in the middle of nowhere, but even in the middle of nowhere, there's a kindred spirit there somewhere.
Truer words. There's nothing like support, and especially from one mother to another. Liz Dyer, our friend, founder of the Mama Bears, she says that she believes that real change in the world is going to come from mothers. It is coming from mothers because it starts in the household, it starts in the home, and then it spills over into school, and then it spills over into the workplace, and then, throughout. And so, I do believe that. I really do believe that. But part of that is just being visible and vocal where you're at and who you're with, and just focusing on moving forward in advancement of, knowing about laws that affect our families, knowing about, who doctors are going to share the same values, and just the dynamics the thing is that this is a beautiful dynamic that is in your family. And I believe that it's a gift to your family from God to be celebrated, and what a gift that gives to the world. And if we could just do what you're doing and the ripple effect of that, I'm encouraged. I'm more encouraged now than John Pavlovich says, I woke up this morning looking for hope, and here you are. Here you are. So thank you so much just for sharing your fears, your anxieties, your challenges and your triumphs, and just for really pushing the envelope, so much so that I know that someone listening, I remember learning about Harvey Milk and him saying something, I'm probably going to botch it, but saying everyone knows someone who's gay. Well, I believe the same is true today among the transgender community. Everyone knows, either indirectly or directly, someone who is transgender or someone who loves someone who's transgender. And here we are, here you are. So thank you for just sharing and being available and just stepping up to your superpower, right? And is there anything that we didn't ask, or maybe that we didn't cover, that you'd like to say to a parent or a child or an adult? We have a few minutes left. If you want, just feel free to share those things that maybe I forgot to ask.
I'll go, because I didn't get to say my biggest fear. And I think, I like to see my job as showing up as the person who totally normalizes gender diversity in my body, in my spirit, in my household, in the world I create around me. I normalize what it means to have more than two genders. And I try to look through eyes at what that world will be and what that world could be. That's what's important to me. And my biggest fear is that these laws, 2021 has been the worst year for anti-trans legislation in the history of this country. It's a terrible backlash. And my biggest fear is that we are going, like we did with climate change, a small vocal minority is going to dominate the airwaves with misinformation, and we'll spend too much time debating whether or not gender diversity is real. It puts lives at risk, and I want to be part of the force that says we just need to stop having this conversation, And I want moms out there to know that they don't have to listen to those people. They don't have to be afraid of those laws, that the majority of this country supports the LGBTQ+ community. We just do. We're just good people who love people. And for as many of us to be vocal about that and to look through eyes at the world and see what we've missed by not considering this normal, what we can do to normalize gender diversity, I just feel like we're robbing ourselves of this beautiful community if we don't, you know, and worse, we're putting them in danger. So, you know, wear your pride flag, let people know you're a safe person at your workplace, and yeah, and in your schools, even if you don't have a trans kid, normalizing the fact that there will be trans kids at that school, that there should be changing spaces in locker rooms, there should be bathroom solutions, all that stuff should be normal. That's normal. That is welcoming the full spectrum of our human family.
That needs to be a quote on a t-shirt. So I can't think of anything to add or take away. Thank you, beautiful, beautiful people, for just sharing of your time and your talent today. And I can't wait to just, we need to have this conversation again next year just to see everything that you've accomplished over the next year. So thank you for just staying true to your family, to your beautiful children, and to yourselves, and to humanity, really. So thank you. So on a group hug, we'll go out. Ready? Here we go. Good night, everyone.